so you see what Nietzsche's saying. The lying, 189 again, right? 189 he says, the lying interpretation of the words, gestures, and conditions of the dying. Fear of death, for example, is systematically confused with a fear of death, right? A fear of death is systematically confused with fear of the after death. And what Nietzsche's saying is that you are making a gross logical error in confusing fear of death, which is normal, which can be rational, which is logical, with fear of after death. There is no reason to fear the after death because, Nietzsche would argue, there is nothing after death. Now, you can be agnostic about this, right? You don't have to be as hardcore atheist as that. You can be agnostic and say, listen, I might not know what happens after death, right? After biological death, right? I can't make existential claims after biological death, so I'm going to sort of leave the window of possibility open. You know, that might be fair. The point is, however, if you're really, really trying to make epistemological claims, and specifically epistemological claims of our existential experience, right? Meaning that I want to make claims of my knowledge of my embodiment, the knowledge of my embodiment and the knowledge that I gain through the process of rational deliberation. There is no question at all that that process ends with death, right? There's no way I could possibly, even theoretically, think of, unless it was some weird, you know, pseudo-scientific experiment where, you know, like a brain in a vat, maybe. If you were to do a brain in a vat analogy, maybe. But, you know, that aside, there really isn't a means in which you can logically argue for the epistemological understanding of my existential experience after I've died. Because my existential experience ends with my death. Right? It ends with my death. So the only fear that I have, the only fear that I should have, the only rational account that I can make with respect to death is a fear of death proper. Anything after that becomes an idea which seemingly is true because everyone ascribes to this idea, but Nietzsche, as he said before, Nietzsche would say that this is just a reflection of personal egoism. It's too much hubris, right? You don't want to accept the fact that within the nexus of the universe, our time is limited. And you don't want to relinquish this thing called consciousness, and therefore our self-awareness transcends our biology in the creation of life after death, right? And this becomes, for Nietzsche, just an enormous ontological and epistemological error, and that's the point of note 189. What ends up happening, furthermore, is, as we've seen before, we've used then this idea of after death. It's not only just that there's an illogical and irrational error in positing this existence as ontologically sound, but our morality then, our system of morality is then based on this error, right? Then, so this is the first part, right? This is the superficial level. A level deeper is that we then create an entire edifice of codified law and rules based on this ontological error. In the other worlds, you're going to have X, Y, and Z, and therefore, in this world, you ought to govern yourself accordingly so that your life in the afterlife will be, you know, whatever it is, whatever you desire it to be. So then we construct an entire edifice on this ontological error. So it's error after error, according to Nietzsche. It would be error after error after error. From the foundation of the morality is built on an ontological error, right? What ends up happening is, as we've seen, there's been a conflation within the tradition between what Nietzsche says is the Christian essence and sort of contemporary Christianity, at least contemporary in his time. C-O-N-T-E-M, right? And I'm not going to beat the horse to death, it's already dead, right? So we talked about symbolism here, that's why I am, and we talked about history here, right? And what ends up happening is the contemporary Christians aren't acting in a manner that would have satisfied the essential Christian movement, right? They wouldn't be acting in a manner that Jesus would do, right? Like I said in the previous video, the band's What Would Jesus Do? Well, he would have recognized that the emphasis should be on the symbols, not on the people, not on the institution, not on the dogma, right? It's the symbols that convey power, right? And this has been lost. It's important to recognize that even in a contemporary setting, this is like right now, Bill Maher says this, right? Bill Maher says, Jesus, as this is a quote from an interview that he had on the O'Reilly show, and I've given the notes. Bill Maher says, Jesus, as a philosopher, is wonderful. There is no greater role model, in my view, than Jesus Christ. It's just a shame that most of the people who follow him and call themselves Christians act nothing like him at all. And this is exactly what Nietzsche says, right? Nietzsche says exactly the same thing. Bill Maher and Nietzsche, I mean, almost, interchangeable. It's a shame that so many people call themselves followers of Christ. They call themselves Christians, but essentially they completely misunderstand the essence of Christian dogma, if you will, right? They completely misunderstand the importance and the role of symbolism, and what they do is they embody all of the teachings within historical events such that resurrection becomes the resurrection of an actual man's body rather than a reinterpretation or a resurrection of my worldview, such that ideas of immortality and the nature and the structure of infinity becomes embodied in personal divination, personal embodied immortality, and on and on and on. So Maher is saying, listen, there's a complete misunderstanding of the text. Nietzsche says in a subsequent note in 191, Nietzsche says in a subsequent note in 191, quote, Christians never put into practice the acts Jesus prescribed for them. Almost exactly what Bill Maher was saying, right? Christians never put into practice the acts Jesus prescribed for them. The Buddhists act differently from the non-Buddhists. So when I look at a Buddhist, I notice that the Buddhist acts differently from a non-Buddhist. I can say, oh no, this person must be Buddhist because his actions are different. He doesn't look like the masses. He acts differently than the masses. The Christian, according to Nietzsche, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a Christian and a pagan, a Christian and a Satanist, a Christian and an occultist. For all practical purposes, they all act the same, right? There isn't a distinction in the way that they act, right? Because, again, it's more about disposition. It's about going to church on Sunday. It's about, evoking the name of the Lord or whatever, rather than actually practicing what the rules are in the text, right? It now becomes a religion of convenience, in a sense. So, Nietzsche says, Christians have never put into practice the acts Jesus prescribed for them. The Buddhists act differently from the non-Buddhists. The Christian acts as all the world does. This is exactly what I was saying. So I can tell the distinction between a Buddhist and the rest of the world, obviously, because they act differently, and their act, again, is informed by the meaning of the symbols that inform, right? Their relationship to, their conception of afterlife, immortality, karma, and so on. The Christian acts, as Nietzsche says, the Christian acts as all the world does, and possesses a Christianity of ceremonies and moods. So the point is, and that ends this part of the discussion, the point is, insofar as we, and this is extreme, I spent just one whole section on this one note, which is a relatively small note, right? 189 to 191 it's not even a full page in the text, but it's important to recognize that insofar as I talk about death, death isn't something that is externalized coming to kill me. Death is a byproduct of our natural biology. That might change a millennia from now, a couple hundred years from now. Who knows what scientists will be able to do, right? As of now, death is an inherent part of our biology. Insofar as it's an inherent part of our biology, what we recognize is we can talk meaningfully about a fear of death and use that fear of death to inform how we live our life in pursuit of excellence. However, the attempt to posit the ontological existence of that which happens after death is one, a confusion epistemologically, a confusion in knowledge. We don't have knowledge, our knowledge can't access after death, because obviously our knowledge is contingent on consciousness, and our awareness dies with our embodiment. And this creates the problem of negative existential proposition, right? Which, in the example that I gave, I forget exactly, from the dissertation, it was, there is no such thing as Godzilla, right? The fact that I say there is no such thing as Godzilla, linguistically is fine, but the negation of Godzilla doesn't then posit Godzilla in the real world. Similarly, talking about after death doesn't then posit this nexus of the structure of after death. No, it's just a linguistic, it's just a product of our language. There is no existence outside of linguistic existence, right? There isn't an ontological existence. There is only linguistic existence of after death, which is really the key point. And what ends up happening, Nietzsche then says, is from this, we then create the entire structure of morality based on this error. And insofar as we create the structure of morality based on this error, our highest values collapse. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This concludes section 8.3.1 of my notes on Nietzsche's Will to Power. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.